Welcome. Dr. Stephen Hobbs here from the WELLth Movement. This is Everyday Trees number 3 for January the 17th, 2021. This Sunday morning sort of excursion into some of the ideas that I share through my work, I am sharing with you via the video. And today, what we're going to do is take a look at something called EcoCreation. And to replace that, if you remember, there is this diagram that I use and the arrow. What we're going to do is take a look at EcoCreation today. But before we jump into it, make sure that you subscribe and ring the bell so you get notifications. And please comment, like, and share. I enjoy learning from you through your comments and questions, and I'll make sure that I answer you. And there is somewhere around the video where you can get a hold of me. And if not, if you go to YouTube to show more notes, there's ways to get a hold of me that way as well. So let's get into it. As a bit of a review, the middle of the 4 circles when they come together is wealth. And I also look at grandparents, that 55 plus years young group, and the grandchildren. Then there is trees, and trees and children is an important element of my work. And this notion of a legacy, the useful what's that you gift others so that they might learn something from your lived experience. And then there is the eco-creation, that's the 4th circle that interacts. And today I want to sort of dive into what is eco-creation, where does it come from? And the best way to do that is to sort of place it in sense of the perspective arrow. And what's happening here is that on any given day, you're involved in decision making. You're making decisions, sometimes that have long-term impact, sometimes that are immediate. If someone yells fire, decision, gone. Decision about what you're going to do for 2021 takes a little bit longer, or you've got some smaller decisions to make as you move through. So decision making is an important element, even of the perspective arrow, in terms of that which is immediate and that which is long-term. So how does it fit into eco-creation? And that's where I'd like to go at this point in time. So to be able to have this happen for us, the first thing I would like to do is mention that there is the world of action, decision-making, action, and taking it from there. And for me, action verbs are really important because when I write statements in my books that are suggestions for others, I start with an action verb that you can actually measure. And by measure, what I mean is, if you were to take that action, you would get a yes or no when you apply it to the outcome that's inside the action outcome statement. And I've been writing it in that way for years now because I'm looking to find a quick way to make an evaluation and to make the decision. And when I have that phrasing, then it's important. So for example, I might use a phrase, something like define ethical decision-making. Well, define, it gives you one level of understanding decision-making, the ethical decision-making. But what would happen if you use the word use? Use ethical decision-making. Decision-making, the ethical, use it. Oh, it's to actually apply it. That's what becomes important here. So the action is what it is that you're setting in motion. Now, what becomes interesting here, all right, is that if you put a RE in front of action, you get reaction. It's about the action. And often what we do is we associate reaction with something that's sort of immediate, and I'm just react to what's taking place in my life. But another way to look at it is to think about the action, about action, to think about it and see if you can improve upon it next time, or was it appropriate at the time? Again, using the example someone yells fire, their reaction is to move out. But sometimes when we're in the long term and we're looking at the possibilities, if we constantly react to what's taking place, we might find ourselves falling behind. And let me just place this here with grandparents and grandchildren and trees. The key here is finding a way to get into action as grandparents with the grandchildren so that they might learn about trees. That's one of the key elements, the key outcomes that I'm looking for in my work. And I do what I can to make suggestions to grandparents so that they might pick up the mantle of helping the grandchildren understand about nature, in particular about trees. And therefore, there's the action that I would encourage them to do, like go for a walk, hug a tree, that idea. And then there's about the action. Was the action appropriate? Sometimes what we might do is to get to a certain tree, we might break branches on another tree. And if you think about that from an action point of view, about the action, you might say, well, next time, I think what we better do is find a way to the tree we want to hug where we're not harming the other tree. So I use that as a very simple example. Now, what's really fun here is that the notion of when you move the C from the middle of reaction to the front of it, you end up with the word creation. You move the C in front, creation. And therefore, the decision making is that you can be in reaction or you can be in creation. I'm one who tends to lean more into creation and to really get involved with understanding it and seeing it before it happens. I use the terms prevention mindset and preparation approach. And that's come from years of teaching first aid, wilderness remote first aid. And when I'm sharing the notion of do you react to the scene or do you create your response to the scene, I get them to think through different kinds of scenarios, because one of the keys is, why is the person on the ground? Why is the person in that position? And to be able to then come in with a creation of a response rather than just react. And that has helped many people to understand a better approach, a safer approach into first aid, which is the same thing as if you're taking the grandkids out into nature. That preparation approach, prevention mindset, allows you to create a way in, a pathway in to nature, to be with the trees that is safer for all of you. And that's why the notion of creation, and then to create the kind of activities that you would want to do with the children and with the trees. And importantly, to answer, why is it that we're visiting with these trees and this particular trees, these groves, this forest, so that the grandchildren might learn something, and as well as you. You can learn a lot about setting up and being an educator of your grandchildren. Just like in the workplace, is that when you help to create responses to make it safer, it's better than just reacting, because then the people get a better sense of their organization of work. I think the point here about the creation is important here. Now, if you put co in front of creation, it's the idea of co-creation. And this is around the story of how do you work with others to co-create the movement into the activity. If you remember, there is this notion of movement. How do you create the movement into the activity? If you're a grandparent with the grandchildren, as time goes by, they can help you with the movement. They can co-create with you the kind of experience they would like to have. Just like in the workplace, is that people can start to co-create the ways in which they want to organize their work. Now, if you put an E in front of co, you get eco-creation. And that plays itself out with the word here, this eco-creation. And what it is, it's about understanding how eco or ecology fits into the mix. And today, one of the things I want to do is I want to take a look at what are the 7 ecological literacy elements that you can take into consideration when you are going into the outdoors in your organizational work. They apply widely across all elements of your interaction with the world. So this is where eco-creation came from, was from the sense of action, reaction, moving the seeds for creation, the co-creation together, eco-creation, from a sense of what nature might be able to help you, inform you about how to improve, focus, and strengthen your day-to-day activities, but also your involvement with the nature and the out of doors. So with that, this notion of movement and these words here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the 7 ecological literacy points, elements that I use in my decision making. So how might nature inform me? I'm going to pick up another time where I'm going to dig into the ethical values part of this story, because there's something I've created called eco-ethical architecture. And I'll leave that for another time, might even be Everyday Trees number 4 when we get to it. So, but today what I want to do is just highlight the 7 eco-literacy elements you can take into consideration. Also, I will put a link to a very good resource that speaks about the ecological literacy. They have the 6, I added one. And it came about from all my years of reading into this whole area of ethics and ecological thinking and decision making and bringing it all together. And so let's get into those 7 elements. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the first one, and these are in no particular order at this point in time, okay? You take them into consideration, and one day one might be shining or flicking like a neon light. Next day it might flip around, maybe there's 2 of them that day. These are just guiding elements that you can take into consideration for your decision making, you know, making a decision from the alternatives, the choices that are available. What direction are you going to go in? You're going to make a decision, and with that decision, you move forward. So the first one that I'd like to go over, okay, is dynamic balance. Dynamic balance. Now, dynamic balance is in the sense of when we think of the weigh scales of justice, we see the scales are meant to get to a point where they are balanced out. However, from an ecological literacy point of view, there is movement. And that's why it's finding that dynamic balance of that movement that is so important. Now, when it gets way out of position, then what we've got is the sense of the pendulum, all right, swinging to extremes. And that's when the things start to become difficult. There is a space in there of movement that, from a grandparent-grandchildren point of view, there is some risk involved. Yes, there's risk walking around. There's risk walking up a hill or scrambling up amongst the trees or even climbing a tree. There is some elements where it's not in complete balance. It's actually, there is movement there. And that's where the fun can come. That's where the play can come from. But if you do too much, right, you take on something that's quite extreme in activity without proper preparation or the mindset, then that is when you can get hurt. Same thing applies to the workplace. There is a dynamic balance that is there in the organization of work. The next one that I want to look at is the sense of nested systems. Nested systems are like the the sense of the Russian doll inside the Russian doll. You probably have seen this, and many of us have had them. And it's that doll that's inside a doll, inside a doll, inside a doll. And you open them up, get to the smaller one, put them back together to get to the bigger one. And it's a way of reminding ourselves that elements of our life are inside themselves. It's sort of like when you were younger is inside of when you're midlife. Midlife is inside when you become an elder. There are elements and that are nested in each other. And when you go out into nature with the grandchildren, you can see this is that just from a tree's point of view, the small trees that are there that, you know, go into the, from seedlings to sprouts and sprout seedlings that go into bigger, more mature trees and up they go. And what happens there is that you can see the different kinds of growth and why did they grow and how the trees are actually moving out from a central point, or how trees are growing because they've been dispersed. There is this notion of the nested systems. And in work, you find that as well, is that there's maybe the project, and then there's the sub-elements of the project and sub-elements of the sub-elements. I think you can get the picture there. They are nested systems and they work together to be able to see the movement that is necessary. The next one that you can take a look at is the sense of cycles. And there are cycles in nature. The easiest one is day and night, that's a cycle. There is the week cycle. There's also the seasonal cycles. And if you're in a place of the world where you get, you know, 4 distinct cycles, where I am, you can actually see the movement through that. There's other countries, the cycles are when it rains and when it doesn't rain. And I can see that. Just like in the workplace, in your organizational work, there's sometimes seasonal elements to your work, where in the summertime, there may be a lot more activity and you slow down in the winter, or vice versa. So there's this sense of cycles. And one day I think we'll probably dig into it and start looking at these very long-term cycles that are like 500 years and how do they influence, and even longer ones, and be able to unpack a little bit of understanding with those. So we'll look at this thing called cycles. Now, the next one that we're going to take a look at, all right, is the area of development. In nature, there's constant development, there's movement, growth, and the growth is in such a way that there's a sense of usefulness or utility. And in our own lives is how might we grow to have usefulness. And when you're a grandparent working with playing with the grandchildren, there's a sense of development. Growth is exposing them to new ideas and nesting those ideas. It's not like you're going to come out and just talk about how does a tree grow using photosynthesis. You may need to start more with, from a development point of view, is let's just touch the tree and hug the tree and look at the different sizes of trees before digging into the cycles of the tree growth. I think you can see where I'm playing with the key ideas here. Now, the same thing applies in the workplace as well, is that there is this sense of development that you've got to take a look at, all right, to be able to continue to grow the organization. Now, the fifth one you can take a look at is flow. In that in nature, there seems to be a flow. It's obvious with the river. I get that, a stream. But there is a sense of flow. I sometimes like to just be in the wind and just see the flow of the wind and see how the grasses bend a little sometimes and not quite as much the next time, and how the trees tremble. There is what's called Populus tremuloides, or trembling aspen in our area. And to watch it tremble is really beautiful, and because you can pick up the wind, the flow of the wind. Now, when I go by a creek, I tend to look at how the water is flowing in the creek. But I can see it with the trees as well, is that how are they flowing, growing out, growing up the hill, growing into an area that maybe was forested, or growing into an area where that starts to shift from deciduous trees to coniferous trees. There's a flow that's taking place, some very long-term, some very short. And if you can see that, it's really beautiful to be able to explain it, and even in terms of like cycles and what's happening there. Again, from a sense of the organizational work, there is a flow. I often will draw a river in sort of an S shape, and fallen trees and rapids and all that, and help people in the organizations think through what's the flow of their work that they're engaged in. You can use that same storyline when you're interacting with the grandkids as well. So number 6 is networks. Now, networks is about how does trees interact with other trees, people interact with other people. Now, in nature, one of the things that is starting to unfold for us is to truly understand underneath the ground how trees communicate with each other. Again, we'll probably spend some time with that one, because communication is such an important element of interaction, even for trees as well as people. But the notion of networks is about, in our own lives, is how do we establish our networks? And those networks can be conflicted, or they can flow really well. Some of them might be light networks. You might see someone maybe once every couple of years, or there are ones where you see people every week. And there are different kinds of networks. And as a grandparent with grandchildren, how do you get together with others and form a network? Just like you're in the workplace, what kind of network is in your group, your green, your team, in your department? It plays itself out there as well. The 7th one is one that I add. The first 6, I'll put the link, and Fitjof Capra and the Ecoliteracy Institute. These are people that you can learn more about this. Fitjof Capra, I read his work many years ago, a book called The Turning Point and Web of Life. And they gave me great insights into what ecoliteracy is about and how it influences movement. And that's where I brought it for the grandparents and grandchildren, so you might understand it. But I also know that grandparents also work, and how might they take some of these ideas back into the workplace as well. So the 7th one that I have added, all right, and some people might go, oh, I don't know if that's actually one of them, but it helps me to understand. It's the concept of equilibration. Equilibration is about the balancing off of the ideas. Now, it's a little bit different than the dynamic balance, which you're just looking at how things and systems balance themselves out. But the notion of equilibration is a purposeful balancing of what we sometimes call the opposites. It's like if you pick up a stick or pick up a pen, pick up one, you pick up the other end. The equilibration is understanding is that when you pick up one end, you pick up the other. So how might you pick up that pen and understand how to work with it? In terms of grandparents and grandchildren, there are sometimes you'll find that there's an opposite storyline that's here in terms of growth and death. And so there's a tree that's young, but then there's a tree that is now a log, a rotting log. Both of them are of value, and they speak of an equilibration about the life of a tree. And to be able to then make that connection is really important. One of the things that I do is I help people to understand that equilibrating paradoxes, there's the opposite thoughts. When you take into consideration this end and this end and equilibrate them, it forms something that is more than if you just look at the two ends. And for me, when I equilibrate, it actually is a place of love. is love comes when I equilibrate the opposites. I could use words like paradoxes, right? Is that there are paradoxes like when your strength can become your weakness. And when you say no, when when you say yes and you really mean no, these are paradoxes. If you can find a way to look at them, all right, and balance them up into the cycles and understanding how they're nested together, these are elements of equilibration. It's more purposeful to us from an inside out. There is maybe a deeper philosophical side to this than nature running around and equilibrating. But I wanted to bring it forward because I think it's an important element of our movement forward with trees every day and how we interact with them and how we live our lives, how we make our decisions. It's really, really important. So with that, that brings to life this whole notion of eco-creation and how it fits in with movement and from a decision-making perspective. From a trees every day number 3 perspective, it gives you insights into the ecological literacy elements of what I'm eventually going to share with you, which is eco-ethical architecture. And we'll leave that for another day. So again, hopefully this brings to life another aspect of the world in which we live, about how you interact with the world and being for the world. So again, remember, please subscribe, ring the bell to receive notifications, comment, like, share. Let's see if there's a conversation to get going, and maybe there's a point that I may have confused or there's a point that you want to celebrate. Let's interact through the videos or wherever you see the video, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, please share away. So with that, take care.